for our first panel discussion, digital transformation, measuring success. Now, I'm sure that many of you have enacted digital initiatives over the last year and a half. Some of them have been strategic, some of them have been tactical, I'm sure. Some have been a knee-jerk response to what you've had to do to stay in business. But how successful have they been, and how do you measure their success? Will that success stay post-COVID? I've got a panel of three industry leaders and an industry overview as well. So if I'd like to introduce our panel, we have Matt Havens. He's the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer at Metcash Group. Claudine Ogilvie, the Asia Pacific Director of Digital Innovation at the Compass Group, Asia Pacific. Tanya Graham, the Executive General Manager of Strategic Programs at HealthScope. And from the industry, we have Elizabeth Watson, Vice President, International Delivery for Conga. Now, could I start the session by asking each of you about your organisation and its level of digital maturity as at March 2020, when the pandemic lockdown started? Now, Claudine Ogilvie from the Compass Group, can I start with you, perhaps?
Yes, of course. So the Compass Group is quite a large and sprawling organisation. We provide food services to 45 countries around the world. We're an organisation listed on the LSE, and last year we had revenues of about £20 billion or 37 billion Australian dollars. Compass Group is an umbrella brand, and under that we have a number of brands that deliver to business and industry, under Urist, for example, and Restaurant Associates. And we deliver to the likes of HSBC, Amex, Google, Microsoft. And for many of these organisations, food is not just food, but it's an experience. It's about productivity, and food takes on a very different shape. And we can come back to that in terms of how the ways of working have changed. We also deliver to healthcare, hospitals, for example, under the Morrison brand, senior living. We deliver to education through the Chartwells brand, so schools and hospitals, which has also completely transformed, sports and leisure through the Levy brand, and finally defence, offshore and remote through the ESS brand. And we deliver, we'll run end-to-end mining villages for the likes of Shell and Chevron and offshore oil and gas facilities. So it is very diverse. And in terms of our digital maturity, I think pre-pandemic, I definitely classify us on the more traditional side of digital. We did digital, but we were not digital, if that made sense. And I think, like so many organisations, the pandemic had accelerated the digitization that we had already planned. But I also believe it has completely transformed many of the way that we do business and our business models as well. And I suppose our journey started off very much focused on health and safety of our employees, our clients, and our consumers. And, we very much zeroed in. We had a global program called SafeSphere, which we rolled out across the world. And that was very much digitally enabled. But very quickly, we moved towards, we had to pivot toward adapting to very different ways of working. And this was we knew this would be a sustained change. We acquired a digital organisation called SmartQ out of India at the end of last year, and that has propelled our digital cafe offering across all our sectors. And you can imagine that looks different in each sector, but it has, I suppose, sparked a new normal for us. And I think our digital maturity has taken a few steps forward since March 2020, it's fair to say.
Excellent. We'll get back to hear some more about that shortly. So Tanya Graham from HealthScope, can I ask you the same question about your level of digital maturity back in March 2020?
Yeah, sure. So just a bit about HealthScope. We're the number 2 private hospital operator in Australia, so purely Australia-based. We've got 43 facilities around the country, most of which are obviously on the eastern side, but includes acute hospitals, rehab and mental health facilities. We've got 18,000 staff, and then we've got another about 17,000 doctors who work with us. So it's a pretty big workforce that we're spanning across. I think in terms of digital maturity back in March 2020, I would say it's pretty low. It was pretty low. Digital was kind of on the roadmap, but it certainly at that point wasn't probably high on the list compared to where it sits now. It's an interesting question though, because I think it also depends on how you define digital. So we've got some very advanced digital medical equipment and technology in our hospitals, things like advanced robotics and imaging equipment and things like that. And we've also been using AI to analyze patient experience as a bit of an experiment. But, so you could argue that that's reasonably mature. But when it comes to digitization of processes, that's really where we're lagging behind. And I think that's the big opportunity for us, and also the opportunity for digitizing the doctor, patient, and employee experience as well.
Thank you. Matt Havens, can I turn to you?
Sure, thanks. So Metcash is the company behind many of Australia's biggest brands, but no one's really ever heard of us typically. So Metcash supports and supplies and runs the brands for IGA in Australia, Mitre 10, Bottle-O, Celebrations, Thirsty Camel, et cetera. So we go to market through 3 business units: food, liquor, hardware. Where were we in March 2020? Was kind of a mixed bag. So our hardware business in Mitre 10 was quite advanced, had a great kind of e-commerce offer, a great loyalty program, et cetera. Food and liquor were not nearly as advanced. So before COVID, we were in the process of putting together plans to drive better digital offers, digital outcomes with our retailers and our shoppers. And March 2020 hit, and those plans suddenly got accelerated beyond anyone's wildest dreams, which has been great. And that's really been a couple of reasons. One, of course, all of us as consumers have likely been in lockdown or went into lockdown, quite quickly. So that drove a lot of end shopper demand for these things. But also, interestingly, a lot of the retailers that we partner with pre-COVID were skeptical or kind of lukewarm at best, let's call it, on digital, because a lot of these offers from a retail perspective add cost. Yes, a better customer experience and outcome, but they do add cost. And so if you're an independent entrepreneur running an IGA or a Mitre 10 or a Celebrations, you kind of question if that additional cost is warranted. So through COVID, we've seen a huge uptick in demand from our retailers wanting these services because end shoppers want those services.
Thanks, Matt. Now, if I can turn to Elizabeth Watson from Congo for a bit of an overview. I mean, you deal with many organizations across all sectors. Just a comment on how prepared you think people were digitally for COVID.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think Claudia and Tanya and Matt just shared some great real stories of really what we saw industry-wide at Conga. And, we all know how important digital is, and it's in most of our titles. But really what we saw is how do we approach those transformations in a way that's digestible from an investment perspective, but that also shows measurable delivery in terms of improved customer satisfaction and making it easier for our employees as we switched the way we were all working. So at Congo, we built a tool first to help companies understand where they sit on a curve of digital maturity, and then to figure out kind of how to get started on a tailored, hyper-localized digital transformation. And we broke it down into 5 levels. So foundation, system, automation, integration, intelligence. And that's getting us all in the same field. But the next question I hear every day is, where do I start? Kind of how do I get on this journey, make it seamless from a technology perspective, digestible from a change management perspective for our employees, but really impactful for my clients. And this is where applying the framework of our revenue operations transformational maturity model really shines. Lachlan?
And what about corporate strategy? We're talking about IT. Has corporate strategy changed as well, or was it IT used more as a tactical response to COVID?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's really 2 parts. First, the way we approach strategic thinking has in and of itself changed. And we could probably talk all day about this shift, and many of us probably have in one form or another. But today, we really need waste-free planning. We just don't have the time, the budgets, or the bandwidth to theorize. We need to make decisions. We need to implement them within hours. And sometimes we need to start all over again when the climate shifts the next day. So a lean planning approach allows you to be faster but more collaborative in your strategic formulation. You're able to be quicker and more effective in communicating to the implementers with kind of less lost in translation. You get that earlier course correction. And in the top tier of organizations who are really doing these transformations well, it allows more objective measurement and control of gaps between what the strategy is and how it's executed in the field. Okay. So second, we've seen common threads in organizations that are hindered and those who have really gained an edge over the course of the pandemic. Those that were hindered are really heavily reliant on manual intervention and specifically for their revenue operations. And that clunkiness just made enabling a remote workforce, let alone being profitable, just a huge challenge. And when you contrast that with organizations that implemented a unified digital strategy in a digestible way from a tech and an adoption perspective, these orgs continued attracting new clients even when face-to-face interactions was no longer an option. And particularly important to me, the good digital strategy focused those top-tier organizations on really delivering high satisfaction to clients who needed information fast with little to no interaction with our staff. So in the post-pandemic world, the heart of strategic thinking is being experience-focused. And that includes both your employees and your customers. It's being easy to do business with, providing a seamless experience when moving between different functions of our org, and doing that in a way that provides additional insights and visibility for our management teams so that we can shift rapidly to any changing market conditions.
What about aligning corporate strategies with digital strategies? Does a corporate strategy come first and then the digital strategy flows from that? Is there a best practice approach that you could talk about?
Yeah, disrupted market conditions make it even more important for strategic plans to be clear, communicable, and measurable. And those key components, include one, having key metrics that define the current state as well as your target end state. Naming your critical assumptions that underpin your plan so that you know when things shift. 3, and this sounds, natural, but you actually have to develop and then implement the initiatives to achieve that end state. And finally, wrapping it in with one kind of concise statement that communicates your strategy overall. So maturity models allow organizations to holistically assess where they are in the digital journey and how you can continually but incrementally improve without taking on too much at once, because we all had more work than ever. And measuring the value you're getting along the way gives you that clear roadmap. So for the whole org, your IT, your business, legal, executives, end users are all talking the same language, which results in better, more connected brand experiences for our clients.
Well, let's talk about measurement then. I mean, should CDOs care about KPIs and what needs to be measured?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is a resounding yes. Digitization requires significant resources, time, energy, and money. And if you can't measure the impact your actions, how are you going to course correct, or how are you going to prove the value of that investment you made? Now, there are soft digital measures, that Matt mentioned, things like employees are happier, customers like us. But how do you measure that? Well, the power of a well-modeled digital transformation strategy is you put numbers to those letters. Satisfaction is a direct flow down of how seamless and easy to do business with you are. And in a maturity model, each step of an engagement becomes a variable with which to calculate your overall employee and customer satisfaction, and it's backed with data. So first, you need to understand your pain points, and really what are you trying to solve for? And maybe the issue is your representatives can't generate a quote without tracking down disconnected approvers. Or maybe clients have gotten outdated packets when they needed info fast on a pandemic-specific offering. All of those processes that are part of your company's revenue operations can be defined, valued, and then systemically addressed, or transparently tabled into a backlog of what you may consider for a future enhancement. And the way to measure improvement is with those KPIs that measure each interaction in your customer journey and your revenue process. So things like quote generation time, approvals lag time, holistic pricing, discounting presentation. KPIs are what really align you around goals, get you to decide as a team how you're going to get there. Course correct early and often. And my personal favorite, celebrate those successes as you hit milestones of improvement along the way.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. Now, Claudine, can I turn back to you? You gave us a picture of Compass at the beginning of the pandemic and hinted at some of the initiatives that you take. Can you take us through some of the projects that you initiated during the pandemic digitally?
Yeah, of course. So I touched on at the beginning that we looked at a program called Safe Sphere, very much focused on health and safety of our employees, of our clients, and of their consumers, or their employees, if you like. And so that was an extremely successful program, one of the first at the time to be rolled out so widely and comprehensively. And it was all digitally enabled, and that was probably, I suppose, our first big foray into what it was to operate digitally. Very quickly, that turned into a digital cafe. I mentioned we acquired a company called SmartQ, and they developed an app which is designed to manage that customer experience that Elizabeth touches on, and create the digital cafe. And that's a very exciting, I think, digital development for us. It's been designed in such a way that it's it's modular. We can tailor it to our various different sectors and the different consumer experiences that we need to I suppose, shape. And I think Elizabeth touched on the importance of agility and the need for us to change and evolve very quickly with what is, I think it's a change in progress. How people are now eating. Nobody is quite sure as to how we're going to exit this pandemic. How what's going to stick, what's not going to stick. But there are a few operating models for us that have changed, and we think will remain. So themes along the lines of I want to eat whatever I want to eat anywhere and any time. So the need to, for example, deliver food, and it could be within a campus situation. And when I say campus, it could be for say Google, which have very large campuses, or a university situation where actually people are no longer really going necessarily to a cafe or a food outlet to go get their food. They're going online. They're ordering digitally. They're clicking and collecting sometimes, or they want it delivered to their desk, to a building, and sometimes even to their homes. So this has created quite the challenge for us, which we're now addressing, depending on the various different markets, as to how do we digitally deliver on all these very different consumer experiences, depending the client need, the sector need. We're no longer just operating a kitchen. Now we need to deliver. We'll be partnering with the likes of Uber Eats, for example, in some countries, and other such organizations. And we're looking at different products that might suit, I suppose, different environments. In the hospital area, for example, we're looking at how do we deliver medically tailored food to our patients in hospital, of course, but enable them to choose their food and perhaps also their guests. But then we know that when patients leave hospital and go home, some of them need to continue to eat very specific food, very specific diet. Sometimes that can be very hard depending on the individual. And we know a number of people end up back in hospital and it's avoidable because they haven't necessarily been eating properly. What if we could deliver home that same food that they were getting in hospital? It's not something you can just ring up Uber Eats and say, I want that medically tailored meal, especially for Claudine Ogilvie. So there's some really interesting new ways of delivering client and consumer value that I actually think it's really exciting, and it's changing the way not just that we eat, but we operate fundamentally in our business. In some situations, because people aren't necessarily wanting to go to a cafe, sometimes it's great from a collaboration perspective. But if everything's being delivered externally, because that's the new state of things, then, we probably much more efficient and effective to start delivering out of a dark kitchen or a central production kitchen, which can, which connects to the app, which you can then completely, perhaps even start looking at personalization and new uses of data from your consumers.
So can I ask you a question? You did tell me when we had a chat before the session that now you're winning and losing contracts based on your digital offering. I'd be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, this is a space we know we're not the only ones who have pivoted towards digital. Our competitors have as well. And as much as I can see that we are aggressively going down this path of reinventing operating models and consumer and client experiences, so are our competitors. So this is a space that is no longer a nice to have. It's a must have for us in our industry. I mentioned earlier the difference between doing digital and being digital, and I think that is a critical change for us. We're no longer digitizing processes and improving the way that we do business. We're actually changing and completely transforming the way we do business, because our client and consumer expectations have fundamentally changed. And this is why digital is starting to make the difference between winning and losing clients.
Thank you, Claudine. Tanya, can I ask you, when the pandemic first hit, where was your organisation in terms of developing a corporate strategy, and where did IT fit in that? Digital, where did it fit, and how did the pandemic change the approach?
Yeah, it was interesting, I guess. We were midway through creating a corporate strategy, which was the first strategy that we'd had as a business for quite some time due to some ownership changes. And I guess we continued to work through the strategy last year through the sort of major Victorian wave that we had. We're actually Melbourne head office, so that had a big impact on us last year, and approved the corporate strategy with the board in November. What was interesting, I found, I joined the company partway through that process, was that we spent a lot of time, effort, money on creating a really comprehensive corporate strategy. But the IT, so the technology and the digital component, was on page 500 as part of the next steps, which basically said, create an IT strategy and create a digital strategy, which at the time I thought was a little bit odd, that we could have invested so much time on the breadth of the corporate strategy and not really considered the technology side. I was in the CIO role at that point, and so the next step of creating the IT strategy and the digital piece fell to me. But actually, it was the right thing to do, because what it meant was that we could really unpick the corporate strategy and have a really clear understanding of what was the technology uplift that we needed to be able to deliver against some of those aspirations, and how do we weave the digital component all the way through the corporate strategy, which is what Elizabeth was saying just before, and I can see her nodding, that you don't want them as independent strategies. They have to be completely integrated. And so we've just completed the digital component, and it is kind of fully integrated now back in with the corporate strategy. And this year and into next year and beyond, we're then focusing obviously on the execution of that strategy. And for us at the moment, it is a very delicate balance between pushing forward on the strategic aspects that we know we need to deliver, but also balancing that with quite an intensive COVID response that obviously is escalating, particularly in New South Wales at the moment. So getting that fine balance between the two.
Yeah, so is it digitally, and in terms of IT, is it a balance between that business as usual, because you are at the front line, and also implementing things for the corporate strategy? Does it mean that those things for the corporate strategy are kind of on the back burner while you deal with business as usual?
Well, inevitably, as you can imagine, there's a lot of effort at the moment going into the operational side of the business, and that is very, very consuming right now. But I guess in terms of my role, I've got a very clear direction from the CEO and the board that we need to keep a focus on the strategic aspects as well. inevitably it will mean we'll need to slow down on a couple of things because we just don't have the capacity to do everything. But we can't afford to completely pause on the strategic side. And then, 6 months down the track, we find that, we're lagging behind because of that. So we are trying to kind of, as I say, create that balance between the two.
Thank you. Matt Havens, can I turn to you now? I understand that one of the initial responses at Metcash was the creation of a digital shopping solution for the IGA brand. But that's recently been launched as a result of the learnings that you've had over the last 18 months. Can you tell us about that project and the learnings and the reiteration of the solution?
Yeah, so thanks, Lachlan. We like in the early days of the pandemic, we didn't have a solution for our IGA stores and e-commerce solution. So quickly launched something just to get it in market. And that was actually fantastic. We got that spun up within a few weeks. It was clunky, wasn't great for end shoppers, wasn't great for our retailers. And so we knew we had to replace it over time, but it gave us something in market to learn from, right? So we got a lot of comments back from retailers and shoppers on what they liked, what they didn't like. And so then, and it wasn't scalable. So we put something in market that was kind of a quick and dirty solution. And we've just relaunched in the last few weeks now with a new platform, which is, first of all, it takes into account a lot of those pain points that had been expressed, pain points mentioned before, addresses a lot of those pain points, a scalable solution, and we're in the process now of rolling that out more broadly across our IG retailers.
So how did you gather feedback? How did you understand that this system needed some modifications and you needed to look at it again? What was the process of understanding that?
Yeah, look, this is one of the areas where I think we've really accelerated also through COVID and through the pandemic is just our ability to sense and learn from customers. So everything from, of course, the feedback you get from the website itself, the feedback you get from retailers, hey, the order was late, it missed something. But we've also ramped up our ability to go out into market and hear from customers. So we brought on and grew our design thinking and kind of designer contingent in the business. So we have the capacity and capability now to go out and conduct ethnographic research, to conduct focus groups, to do a lot more of the listening in a way that we hadn't before. We're listening more to our call centers, what's coming into those. So kind of we have a better, more systematic way of holistically hearing from customers, everything from what happened on that specific order to generally what are you wanting and thinking. That's true across food, liquor, and hardware. So just in general, a better capacity to listen and respond. And then, of course, the ability to make changes once we've heard those things. So we were starting to down an agile path pre-COVID, and that's accelerated through COVID. So once we hear those insights and pain points, frictions, we can prioritize and quickly respond through fast turnaround of features and changes to our technology.
Now, you're responsible for several brands. I mean, everybody knows IGA, Mitre 10, and there are some drinks brands as well, Thirsty Camel, I think, Celebrations as well you have. In a digital sense, were these brands siloed pre-pandemic, and have the initiatives that you've instigated over the last year and a half or so, has that sort of tended to break down the silos?
It has. We're not there yet. There's a long way to go. But historically, the business had been run in a very, very siloed business unit way. So the food business ran separate from drinks, separate from hardware, and so we're starting to, and through COVID, have been forced to look at how we make that easier and better for our employees and our business. So, for example, we're choosing between one platform in one of the businesses. Another business had that platform already. There was some debate as to what platform we should use. Why not just use the one that already exists so that we can have one set of training, kind of one set of technologies, one set of things going out into the field for our retailers. So just decisions like that. We're looking to have a unified back-end kind of technology backbone as well. That's a new thing that we're putting in place, and that kind of has started since COVID as well. So there's I feel there's a huge amount of efficiencies that we still have to gain by fewer technologies, fewer platforms that we're all on. Now that's not always perfect and always right because the businesses are somewhat different, but where we can do that, it's just easier for everybody. It's more cost effective. It's more mindset intensive for one platform, therefore better for our developers and teams. So it's just better all the way around.
Now, Claudine, can I ask you, I mean, you, in a sense, also have a siloed situation in that you're a global company and the silos are more geographical, but I understand that there was, in the digital sense, more collaboration and sharing as a result of what we've been through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so if I were to perhaps step back on Compass's, how Compass is structured, we're a very large global organisation, but very federated into the countries, and the countries are empowered to really just get on with it and do what they need to do. And I think each market is really quite different from one another. And that has been a very successful strategy. And I don't think we're moving away from that strategy, but there is a layer of synergies and economies of scale that we also need to leverage globally. It's one of our competitive differentiated pieces, being a large global organisation. And so when we think about digital platforms like the one I was talking about earlier around time to eat, or the way we manage and perhaps even share internal data, how can we do that in a way that we can share insights, that we can better see the trends that are happening worldwide, that our global clients are interested in seeing as well. They want to know what's going on, and they expect us to be at the forefront of that. And in terms of how we, how we link that back to sort of the digital piece, I mean, I think being able to measure performance and those strategic goals inside and out is incredibly important to understanding how that consumer experience is evolving, and it's evolving fast at a global scale. And I think once you can start sharing that level of information, you can evolve it much more quickly and for everybody. So you don't have to say reinvent these things for each of the 45 countries that we happen to service. If you can do that once and share and make change part of the way that we operate, I think that's part of the secret sauce.
Thank you. Tanya Graham, you're in a rather difficult, different situation, I should say, in that your stakeholder management is entirely different. You have patients, you have doctors, you have medical practices, and you also have a private equity owner. Just interested in how you balance those stakeholders in trying to push forward digital initiatives.
Yeah, you probably hit the nail on the head there when you said difficult instead of different.
I meant to say different.
But yeah, it's interesting. We've got a really broad set of stakeholders. So, obvious ones being the executives, the owners, who are Brookfield in our case, and the board. We also have to work very closely with the private health insurers, with our doctor community, and also we've got very strong government links as well for the public work that we pick up. So it's quite an interesting stakeholder group to navigate. And you're right, that does create a little bit of tension at times when you're trying to work with all those different groups, both from a funding perspective and where our revenue comes from, but also a bit of a tension in terms of how we invest in transformation and strategic initiatives in digital, because obviously with a private equity owner, they are trying to balance their investment parameters against what, being in healthcare is really a purpose-driven organisation, where most people join the organisation because they want to care for patients and they want to focus on experience, and they don't actually care about the financials. So that does kind of lead to a little bit of tension and having to look at, different funding models and that kind of thing. It does help us to narrow in on where our priorities need to be and where to direct investment. But just to share a very, very quick story, last year during the devastating Victorian wave, where, over 800 people unfortunately lost their lives, we had a number of COVID patients in our facilities and obviously weren't allowed visitors. And one of the things that we did very quickly was to deploy iPads into the wards, just with simple iPad, nothing on it other than ability to video call and data SIM cards. So we didn't have to navigate Wi-Fi or all the normal IT complexities. But that enabled people to communicate with their relatives who were in those wards, some of whom obviously recovered, and unfortunately some of them they had to say goodbye to. And I think that was that balance between, the investment discussions and then obviously doing the right thing by the people that we work with.
Yeah. Okay, now we've just got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go around the panel now, and I'll start with you, Tanya, actually, as you've got the floor now. So just an idea of how you measure the success of your digital initiatives over the last 18 months, what KPIs you've used, or is it too early to understand whether they've been successful or not?
I think for us, we're at the very early stage. So we've literally only just defined what our digital aspirations are. So we haven't quite got to the stage of defining the KPIs, so it's a bit early to tell. I think what we need to do, though, is, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've already got ad hoc activity happening in the digital space. We need to pull that together into a cohesive story that we can then build from. But we will be looking at some specific KPIs around adoption, uptake, return on investment, those kind of things. But we do need to make sure we're driving some traction early and people can see some progress, even though a lot of the digital stuff is a bit of a longer term play.
Thank you. Claudine, can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, I think we touched on this in terms of digital success. It needs to be completely and integrally entwined into the business strategy and its KPIs. But if I would also zoom in to what that means beyond what is the corporate strategy and understanding how digital supports that, and then you're looking at speed to market and excellence and digital execution, anything from time from idea to value to the customer impact and how digital has touched different stages of the consumer experience journey. And that could be from NPS, CSAT, and you can leverage that in different ways. I think it's important to understand how digital contributes to your competitive differentiation. How has that impacted in our case, in different countries or sectors, that market share and your growth targets? Then it's the innovation, your agility, what does the agile metrics that you can apply to your business that aren't necessarily strictly agile methodology, but your agility as a business to pivot, to test and learn from new ideas. They're a way to measure that. And then finally, you've got a lot of other tech metrics that are worth tracking, such as reduction in your tech debt. A lot of organizations, we say this has accelerated our digitization of our business. Have we also been getting rid of that tech debt? Because that also contributes to our agility, adoption of perhaps DevOps methodologies, and things like a percentage of product releases that are accepted. So there are dozens of those sorts of metrics that you can apply to understand if you're executing well, fast, and in a way that you can then deliver on those business metrics.
Thank you, Claudine. Matt Havens, can I turn to you?
Yeah, so a lot of good stuff mentioned. We've tried to break down our metrics and KPIs into lead versus lag, right? So the lag stuff is the stuff you'd probably expect. It's sales, very financial oriented. It's looking backward at the last quarter. How do we do over the last month? Customer satisfaction, retailer satisfaction also fall into those categories, but it's very, looking at the past. The lead indicators are what's going to deliver success in the future. And that's a mixed bag of things depending on the maturity of that business unit. So number of stores that have, click and collect, number of stores that are adopting digital, number of new shoppers, number of repeat shoppers. Same thing as I just heard. So from Claudine, time to market for a product, time to market for a feature. We've done a lot of work around customer journeys and identified number of pain points. So how fast and what's the number of pain points that have been resolved and how fast are we resolving them? Same thing with Claudine on Agile. So how many Scrum Masters do we have? How many projects are running Agile? Stuff like this. So it's kind of the lead and lag, but also then looking from end consumer through to the organization to figure out what's going to drive success tomorrow and a year from now.
Thank you. So Elizabeth Watson, I'll give you the final word. Can you interested in your response to what you've heard from the three other panelists?
Yeah, everything has resonated so much. So I've probably been a little bit of a bobblehead just trying to agree so much. I really have seen some of the challenges, between different verticals like Matt mentioned. across countries in our global landscape, like Claudine mentioned, and having so many different stakeholders that we have to account for, as Tanya was saying. And really there were two schools of thought at the beginning of the pandemic as to how to handle it. One was, let's wait and see on the overall economy, kind of what should we do before we invest again. But the second said, let's use this time to improve, to invest, to make sure that when we head out of whatever this is, we'll be agile, we'll be empowered, we're accountable, we're clear on our goals, and we're confident in the options to get there. Now, organizations that have implemented a unified digital strategy fared better as we came to this new normal because, no matter the need, they have the ability to pivot while staying accountable to those business outcomes that they're driving. And, as I look at those KPIs, there really is no looking back. Once a company has kind of smoothed the revenue operations model, you're just never going to go back to the clunky processes that we all endured in our jobs, because clients just won't be interested in doing business with us when someone right down the digital road is able to deliver a more seamless experience. So delving into the details of the maturity model and how your company can drive change, it can be a really rich workshop. And, I'll offer to anyone here that I'm happy to spend time with you personally and with our transformation teams to really review where you're at as a company, what you should tackle next, and how far in that digital journey the right strategy can take you. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or email, and I'll help you out.
Thanks for that, Elizabeth. So that brings us to the end of our first panel session. I'd like to thank very much the panelists, Elizabeth Watson from Conga, Tanya Graham from HealthScope, Claudine Ogilvie from the Compass Group, and Matt Havens from Metcash. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.